He came in through Biden's ridiculous open border policy. Trump writes of the man who has purportedly confessed in the Boulder Flame-Thrower Attack, which has hurt our country so badly he must go out under Trump policy. Yeah, great. Well, he didn't. Trump, you have blood on your hands for Boulder, Colorado. The attack on the weekly march of those remembering the Gaza hostages was carried out by a man here illegally whom Trump and his big-talking crowd of bullies, losers, and cowards have had 4 months to find and remove, and have criminally failed to do so because they, under phony tough guy Tom Homan and dress-up Barbie Kristi Noem, were too busy kidnapping mothers and gay hairdressers and kids at their high school graduations and people here legally and immigrants dutifully showing up for their hearings the way law-abiding people, law-abiding means not like Trump, law-abiding people do. That the suspect, Mohammed Sabri Soliman, was still here is the fault of Donald Trump. Because the entire MAGA immigration stunt is a show put on for the racists and the xenophobes. It goes after only the soft targets. It uses only brutality and force when neither is necessary. It is there to terrify one part of this country and satiate the sadism of the other part of this country. It is the opposite of securing the borders. It is a prelude to something called remigration, a term I will get to in a moment. And remigration is itself the prelude to ethnic cleansing. And a guy here illegally actually doing something terroristic does not fit in to the scheme of Trump and his henchman, Stephen Miller. The champion of remigration, the demented, warped, soulless bastard behind it, Stephen Miller, who couldn't wait to turn the Sunday attack into a sword with which to again try to butcher this nation's humanity. And I mean, he couldn't wait. Literally, he couldn't wait. If he had waited, more people would have realized Miller and his Gestapo are not the solution to this problem. They are its cause. Miller writes, a terror attack was committed in Boulder, Colorado by an illegal alien. He was granted a tourist visa by the Biden administration, and then he illegally overstayed that visa. In response, the Biden administration gave him a work permit. Suicidal migration must be fully reversed. That's remigration, incidentally. Everything else in there is factually inaccurate. Visa was overstayed in 2013, meaning Trump and Miller have not just had the last 4 months to find and remove this creature, but they had the entirety of 2017 through the beginning of 2021 to do so. They did not act against this man because he doesn't fit the profile. He was not a sitting duck. He was a real danger, and Miller and Noem and Homan and the ICE dickwads who are too terrified to show their faces in public, let alone pursue a real danger, don't want to take any chances with anybody who might cause a problem. Miller, blood on your hands, scumbag. There are people in this country who should not be. There are people who should be deported or repatriated or detained. Every administration has acknowledged this. Every administration has done this. The Obama administration did this at a rate higher than the Trump one has, largely because they looked for threats, not scapegoats, because they were fairly good at finding them. The Boulder, Colorado flamethrower terror attack was hard work to find who did it. It would have been harder work to find who was going to do it. That they didn't try is Donald Trump's fault. And what is to come after this is even worse and even more performative and even more confirmational of the fact that Trump and Miller and Marco Rubio are not looking for criminals to remove. They are looking for innocent people and those guilty of misdemeanors or things less than misdemeanors to purge, to remove, to cleanse. We got little notice last week, but Rubio rapidly rising to the top of the hypocrisy charts to replace even Lindsey Graham for largest percentage of sold, announced a reorganization of the State Department that would, in essence, eliminate all efforts inside that department to provide a haven here for foreign nationals who have helped this country, like the thousands of people in Afghanistan who fought the Taliban with us before Trump surrendered to the Taliban. It would eliminate that department and replace it with, quote, the Office of Remigration. Go look up that word, remigration, on social media. Nearly everything you will find on Twitter X will be in German. Sometimes it will have been translated from German by some pasty white Englishman with bad teeth associated with Nigel Farage. It is the nice way to say ethnic cleansing. It is the word of the decade among the far-right neo-Nazis and the Nordic Aryans. It is what they say is their answer to their great paranoid lunatic fear, the Great Replacement. The theory that white people are to be removed and succeeded by everybody else, by everybody who isn't white at the moment. Remigration. It is what Nazis do in the 21st century. And Marco Rubio wants to introduce it into our country and is trying to do so now. Let's just pass on the irony that most of the European Aryans would look at Marco Rubio and say he needs to be remigrated. They haven't told Marco that part yet. The whole twisted, inside-out, perverted, anti-American, anti-democracy, anti-humanity approach of Rubio and Miller and Homan and Noem and ICE and Trump was summarized in an exchange printed last week by the news site Axios, in which an anonymous current Rubio flunky at State claimed that we've had remigration before in this country because a bureau doing exactly the opposite thing had the same name. Quote, the way that it worked before, population refugee migration was basically an entire bureau dedicated to bringing people into the United States, said the State Department official who spoke on condition of anonymity. It had the migration function. It's in the name. We're just reversing the flow of migrants who shouldn't be here to go out of the country. Consider that for a moment. Remigration is fine, according to Marco Rubio's stooges, because we used to call saving people from bad countries and bringing them here is the same to the Trump criminal gang as taking people from this country and sending them into danger into bad countries. This is exactly the same as saying a blood transfusion is identical to letting somebody bleed to death because blood keeps moving through a little hole in you in both cases. We're just quibbling over which direction it's flowing. It would be patently monstrous if it were not first so patently stupid. But that is the entire existence of Donald Trump in one sentence, isn't it? And this isn't new. They sneaked it through amid the other 10 tons of shit that comes out of Trump's mouth every day. In September of last year, in the middle of the usual racist hate dressed up as border issues, as Trump escalated it towards his neo-Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden just before the election, Trump wrote of his vow to, quote, return Kamala's illegal migrants to their home countries, parenthesis, also known as remigration. Remigration is farther right than even those Trump cultists cheering on the disappearing of the innocents advocate. And Trump is at its forefront, and Trump is bringing it here with his little whore Marco Rubio at the helm. And the key thing to remember is, like all good ethnic cleansing, It is not about finding people who are actual threats, like the man who admitted to creating his own flamethrowers and trying to burn Jews to death in Colorado. Those people are too much trouble for the ethnic cleansers. Ethnic cleansing, remigration, is about convincing all the white people that you don't actually have to search for threats or investigate for threats or prepare for threats or separate those people who are threats from those people who are not. You just round up all the people who you think look like threats. That is remigration. That is ethnic cleansing. That is Donald Trump's presidency. And that, because you no longer bother to look for people who are guilty or who might be planning heinous acts. You just look for their skin tone and their names. That is why the blood of Boulder, Colorado, is on the hands of Donald Trump. I said this would be a headline-based format for this special experimental Tuesday edition of the Countdown Podcast. So, here are some headlines. Good news, big surprise in big law. At least the big Vichy law. The Wall Street Journal reports that Oracle, Morgan Stanley, McDonald's, and at least 8 other gigantic American corporations have moved at least some of their legal representation away from the cowardly collaborators, the ones who folded to Trump and agreed to do his bidding for him if only he would spare them. Collaborators like Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps, now known as Skadden Arps scumbag. McDonald's dropped its Paul Weiss litigator on the eve of trial. Its litigator was Loretta Lynch, the Obama Attorney General, who has not yet had the intestinal fortitude to resign from Paul Weiss. Finally, somebody showing some guts. McDonald's, Morgan Stanley, Oracle. Please note, Columbia University. It's not just the big money bailing out of those who hoard themselves for Trump. Tesla sales in Europe have crashed faster than a Musk rocket. Down 19% in Spain. Down 30% in Denmark, down 36% in Holland, down 54% in Sweden, down 67% in France, down 68% in Portugal. But who will pay for Elon's drugs? Hasn't anybody thought about Elon's drugs? What about Elon's drugs? The price of Depends will go down as a result of this. And while most leading Democrats are still trying to throw everything into reverse, looking at you, Gavin Newsom, because they think all democracy needs is its own Trump, its own Joe Rogan, its own Adolf Hitler, Wes Moore may at least be driving in the right direction, forward. Moore, according to Politico, got the real message out of Trump's success, the real lesson: cut to the chase with the voters. Quoting the Maryland governor from last week, urgency is the instrument of change. And do you know who understands that really well? Donald Trump. Wes Moore went on, I want to be clear, we can and we must condemn Donald Trump's reckless actions, but we would also be foolish not to learn from his impatience. He's right. The point is to promise change as quickly as possible and then do as much of it as you can before they try to stop you. What is the lesson of 2025? Have a game plan. Don't have a party. Have a game plan. map out your first 100 days down to who you are going to indict. We saw what happened when Joe Biden thought we could just go back to normal, not understanding that normal had been destroyed by Trump. We saw what happened when he appointed Merrick Garland, who's still thinking about it. We saw what happened when Biden dithered on putting them all in jail forever. They didn't go to jail. Democratic candidates preparing for 2028 must now vow to prosecute everybody and override any and all Trump pardons immediately by whatever means are necessary. You want change, do you, MAGA? You want re-migration? How about packing up Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio, and Trump at 12:01 p.m., January 20th, 2029, and putting them on a cargo flight to El Salvador before anybody can stop you? Also of interest here on this special edition, I have been challenged by professional complainer and America's favorite 85th place swimmer Riley Gaines to a swimming race of some kind to prove she is right about everything she whines about, which is everything. Here is my advice as a veteran of 50 years in sports broadcasting. Bet on her, because I'm 66 and Riley Gaines is what, 50, 55, something like that? That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann, my crazy friend.
Postscript to the news. Some headlines, some updates, some snark, and sometimes, like in this edition, some stories that are actually just about me. Some of them, like perhaps all. This is the Countdown Podcast, and these are the places where there's news. Dateline Brazil. So you heard about that Glenn Greenwald video. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say about it, except it was hardly the worst Glenn Greenwald video of recent date. Just over the last week, in fact, just over the past weekend and yesterday, Glenn Greenwald also did a videotaped interview with Tucker Carlson, which had far more foot worship and sucking, not necessarily of feet. He claimed Biden had been sick for 5 years, 10 years, 500 years, I don't know. And let me tell you a story about who Glenn Greenwald is. This is from 2010, when Glenn Greenwald was with Salon, and he was not totally nuts yet. Joan Walsh was the editor-in-chief and an occasional guest on Countdown, and I mentioned to Joan that Joe Scarborough had gotten our contributor to the Countdown program on MSNBC, Markos Moulitsas, the host and proprietor of the Daily Kos website. He'd gotten Markos banned because Markos had made a vague reference on Twitter to the death of the woman assistant in Joe Scarborough's congressional office. There was a valid point in making this reference because Joe had insisted that the Democrats would never investigate something bad that had happened to somebody, and Markos was pointing out, an investigation like what happened to your assistant in your office when she died. Well, Scarborough accused Markos of accusing him of murder, went to our bosses, and because he and one of my bosses used to like to go drinking together, he got him to ban Markos Moulitsas from my show. So somebody else getting one of my regulars banned from my show, which made the company $100 million a year, some of which was spent on backstopping the money-losing Joe Scarborough program, which has now proved to be what it always was at heart, a conservative blowing with the wind. He's back to blowing with the Trump wind, and you can make the next stage of that joke for yourself. In any event, I mentioned this to Joan Walsh in a conversation before or after she was on the show one night, and she said, Glenn Greenwald is really upset. He'd heard something about this and would love to be able to write something, even if you have to do it anonymously with him. And I said, well, have him give me a call or shoot me an email or whatever, and I can't remember if he emailed me or shot me a call or what he did. I don't remember which way it was, and I don't have the records of this anymore, but I do remember the conversation, whether it was written or actually oral, A-U-R-A-L. Glenn wanted to know if this was true, if Scarborough had connived to get Militzis thrown off MSNBC on a permanent basis. And I told him what I knew about it. And I said, now it has to be completely off the record because I can't talk to you about this. I can't reveal this information. They could fire me, and I don't want them to fire me because I am preparing to quit this place. He said, I agree completely. I will always keep your confidence. I have never given up a source. I have that same journalistic standard that you do. I have great respect for your work, blah, 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 blah. And he published some kind of story about it, citing an anonymous NBC source. He didn't even point me out as the person who had talked to him. And apparently he had many other sources for this story. It was not exactly a secret, but obviously I would have been the definitive one. Marcos knew about it, obviously, too. He'd gotten the phone call from the MSNBC executive who did this act on behalf of his pet, Joe Scarborough. So something happened in the ensuing couple of days, and I don't even remember what this was, but I was critical of some detail, some minor conclusion in a Glenn Greenwald article and said so on Countdown, and the next thing I knew, Glenn Greenwald, I believe again, was on the phone telling me that if I did not retract my criticism of him, he would announce that I was the source for his story about Marcos Militzis being banned, in effect, by Joe Scarborough. Theoretically, at least, jeopardizing my employment at NBC, and theoretically setting me up to be fired for cause for speaking to him without permission. That is who Glenn Greenwald was in 2010. So if you saw what I saw in the 6 or 7 seconds I watched of that other video, not the Tucker Carlson one, the Tucker Carlson stuff doesn't surprise me in the least. Glenn Greenwald has no standards, and certainly no standards that are relied upon to exist in the same way 6 months from now, let alone 15 years from now. Glenn Greenwald dressed up in like a sexy French woman maid's costume. Doesn't surprise me at all. It's like, oh, I knew he must have had one of those. Glenn Greenwald. Dateline, 85th place in some swimming pool somewhere. Riley Gaines is back. I happen to think this might be the greatest self-own of the modern social media era. I pointed out once again, I think it was this time after Linda McMahon, the secretary of I Don't Have an Education, claimed that one of our great Olympic swimmers, Riley Gaines, had had her career ruined and something like her Olympic medals denied because she had once had to face or she was beaten by a transgendered swimmer. In point of fact, Riley Gaines never participated in the Olympics because she was a mediocrity. She finished fifth, tied for fifth in the race won by Leah Thomas, the former male who was swimming as a woman for Penn State, whenever this was, in like the last known incident of a major sporting event involving a transgender athlete, because all the time we spend talking about this and the Republicans wringing their hands because of their secret fear that one day they'll wake up wanting to become transgendered, because that's what this is all about, just as their hatred of gays is all about their secret desire to be gay. Look it up. In any event, the whole thing behind this is they would rather spend months, years, decades debating and, of course, demonizing the people involved rather than spending the same amount of time looking at each case individually of there being a transgendered athlete competing against women who were born women and saying, Well, what kind of balance can we make here? It's like the horse races. If the jockeys are different weights in a horse race, if all the jockeys are 135 except for that one guy who weighs only 132 pounds, they give him 3 pounds of weight to put in his shoes so he weighs the same as the other jockeys. Otherwise, you'd win the race based on how light the jockey was, and someday somebody would win a race with a 47-pound kid running the race on behalf of the horse owner. So you could just do that by, I don't know, in swimming, add a second to the athlete who had the long bones, who had the male physique or part of it before they were transgendered. It's not impossible. My friend Renee Richards, who happens to be a transgender athlete who won a title at the U.S. Open as a woman and did not destroy women's tennis in the process and did not beat Martina Navratilova and was accepted in the community and did not destroy things, she has suggested that perhaps this is the solution. You play a game in tennis or a match in tennis, and the transgender athlete starts having lost the first game, so that the other athlete, the woman in the race, in the game, in the match, is already ahead 1-0, and then you start. Something you could spend a lot of time examining each case and resolve it equitably to everybody's belief in 1/1,000,000th the time that has been wasted turning this into a debate as if the world is filled with male athletes who decided to cut off their penises so they could win a fricking tennis match. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. You will find lots of male athletes who will joke that they'd cut off a testicle to win. You've never heard one say they'd cut off something a little bit more important in the same general physiological area. In any event, Riley Gaines believes her life was ruined by a transgender swimmer. She would have finished, 84th in the Olympic trials rather than 85th. She would be a little less mediocre without transgendered athletes. Therefore, she has become a campaigner against them. Her latest big thing was complaining about the University of Maryland selecting as its speaker for its commencement address Kermit the Frog, rather than, just to throw out a name, Riley Gaines. I think you can make the comparison there and understand that Riley Gaines is not considered to be as smart as Kermit the Frog. Certainly, she doesn't sound as unusual as Kermit the Frog, and she has more broad human intelligence than Kermit the Frog. In any event, that was the latest thing. And, of course, Kermit the Frog and the creator of the Muppets, Jim Henson, have a long-standing connection to the University of Maryland. There's a statue of them there. There is history there. But I digress. The self-own I promised you. I wrote about Linda McMahon making a big deal and pointing out that she finished 85th in the Olympic trials. She finished tied for 5th in the only race. If there had been no transgendered athlete, she might have finished tied for 4th. Riley Gaines responded, "I'm literally one of the fastest Americans of all time, but okay, LOL. If you're one of the fastest Americans of all time, how come you finished 85th? I'd challenge Keith Olbermann to a race where the loser puts up money to the charity of the winner's choice, but no one wants to see him in a Speedo." Yeah. Duh. This is a brilliant idea, though, Riley Gaines. I accept your challenge to a race, a swimming race. A 66-year-old man who has not been in a swimming pool to swim in the swimming sense of the term since 1971, who has an arthritic left knee with enough empty space in it that he could keep his skis in it, who has chronic stress fractures in his right foot. Me, 66-year-old guy. Somebody you could finally beat. Dateline, Tarrytown, New York. Yesterday, Hackley School, my alma mater, 50 years ago, which was the last time I actually got into a pool to swim competitively. Dear members of the Hackley Cum Laude Society, you are cordially invited to the 2025 Cum Laude Society induction ceremony. My name is Jude in Black Box Theater, located in the Center for the Creative Arts and Technology at Hackley School. Celebrate Hackley's. Founded in 1906, the Cum Laude Society is an association of 382 chapters in the United States and abroad, dedicated to honoring scholastic achievement in secondary schools. Each chapter is limited to electing a maximum of 20% of the senior class per year. This is at least the 55th ceremony at Hackley. It's probably closer to the 119th. I can only refer to the ones I can testify to, and it's 55 years since I got to Hackley. So they've been at least 55 of them. And I was invited because I am a member. I was one of the 7 or 8 members inducted to the Cum Laude Society in 1975. A certain grade point average based on a percentage of the class is set as the cutoff point, and I don't remember what it was. It might have been a 3.7 or a 3.8. I don't know. But I had it, and I was admitted, and I can now reveal it's a total fraud. I don't mean it's a total fraud in that it helped me get into college when I didn't belong there. The college grades on which I was judged preceded the events that I'm going to talk about. I'm not saying that anybody took money for this or that anybody did anything other than did some common sense here. This was not planned, and one of those rare events where the law of unexpected consequences turns out to be positive for everybody, except whoever would have been behind me on the list who actually should be in the Cum Laude Society. As I have said many times, again, I'd already gotten into my colleges that accepted me based on grades that had nothing to do with the Cum Laude Society, so I didn't need it to get into college. I didn't ask for it. I didn't check on it. When they said, "You're going to show up for the ceremony tomorrow?" I said, "What ceremony?" They said, "You're in the Cum Laude Society," and I burst into laughter because of the following story. I was mistaken as a child for a math genius. In point of fact, I just liked playing with small numbers. I literally had a box full of numbers, magnetic numbers, plastic numbers with magnets in the back, and I like to play with the numbers, and I love numbers, and my interest in sports originates from the numbers on the backs of the baseball cards and the numbers on the backs of the players and all the numbers and the statistics on the baseball cards. That's my interest in it. I was a numbers freak, but I was not a math prodigy. This was a mistake. Several people were involved in making this mistake, and I learned it faster than they did. I was not a math prodigy. I just like to sit there and, add 47-digit numbers or multiply them just to see if I could do it. That didn't imply that I could do anything else, including divide. Once we got into fractions, I began to flounder. And then later on, I really hit the wall. I hit the wall as a senior in a class called Math 5. And Math 5 was taught by the head of the math department, Jerry Murphy, a very nice, easygoing guy with a great sardonic sense of humor. And when we got into the trigonometry problems, he put one up on the board, 6 or 8 lines of X's and division marks and square roots and equal signs, and I looked at it. And then I turned my head upside down, and I looked at it upside down, and it looked exactly the same. And then I put one hand over my left eye and looked at it, and one hand over my right eye and looked at it, and it all looked exactly the same. And I raised my hand and I said, "Mr. Murphy, which part is the question, and which part is the answer?" And he went, "Oh, you've hit the math wall." And I said, "I thought I heard something." He said, "Come see me after class." There were 3 of us who went to see him after class. 3 of us, otherwise intelligent math students who had gotten A's and B's in math throughout our high school careers, who had suddenly hit that point in which that could have been instructions on how to install a humidifier written in Chinese up there on that blackboard, as well as a math problem. We couldn't have told the difference. And Mr. Murphy said, "This is very easy. Don't worry about it. I hit my math wall. It's why I'm not Dr. Murphy." I was on my second day of working one of those equations that they would give you in maths college that would take 2 or 3 days for you to solve. And I was so far behind on day 2 that I burst into tears. And my wife said, "Jerry, it's probably time for you to drop out." And I said, "You're right. I'll just go become a math teacher and teach the stuff I understand and not spend the rest of my life trying to understand the things I am not wired to understand." He said, "This is what I want you to do. Go down to the registrar's office and change this class from a graded class, A, B, C, D, F, to a pass-fail. I will pass you under the following circumstances. You and you and you, Olbermann, especially you. You come in every day, and I don't want to hear a word out of you. I don't want you talking to anybody else. I don't want you egging anybody else on. I don't want you, Olbermann, making any quips. I just want you sitting there quietly. You may bring newspapers. The only noise I want to hear from you during the class is the sound of you passing newspapers back and forth. If you actually understand something, raise your hand and we'll talk about it after the class. Otherwise, I don't want to know you're here. I'll pass you, and that will be that. I'm not going to keep you from graduating because you hit the same math wall I did, only a little earlier. That was great. And he said one more thing. You guys do this new Monty Python series. You watch this Monty Python show every night, Sunday at 10:30, and you come in talking about it. Every Monday morning, I want you to come into this class and reenact as best you can the best skit from the latest Monty Python show, because I go to bed at 10 o'clock every night. We had met Mrs. Murphy, so we were not surprised by that in the slightest. If anybody could get that class quiet in a hurry, it would be when Mrs. Murphy would stop by. There was a reason to consider maybe pursuing math a little bit further. Mrs. Murphy liked math guys. In any event, so we would come in every Monday morning and we did the parrot sketch from Monty Python and then sat down and I'd read the New York Daily News, which I brought in, and one of my friends would read the New York Post that he brought in, and the third friend would have the Times, and then when we were done, we'd just pass it along, and then we left and we all got passes instead of fails or D-minuses. So my cum laude graduation record, the fact that I was invited to the Cum Laude Society and have for 50 years been in the Cum Laude Society, is a total unmitigated fraud. Thank you, Jerry Murphy, because if you had not committed that fraud and I had not participated with you, I would not be in the Cum Laude Society. I would instead be at Hackley School in Tarrytown, New York, in my 51st year as a senior who had failed Math 5 50 years in a row. Dateline Washington and the Washington Post. One of the few remaining assets of that newspaper is Philip Bump, especially his Saturday newsletter, How to Read This Chart. Imagine my surprise at this. CNN's Ariel Edwards-Levy has this annoying habit of finding weird, interesting poll results that I feel compelled to explore. This week, Bump went on, she for some reason found 2010 polling from Pew Research Center in which respondents were asked whether they knew anyone named Adam, Alan, Bruce, or one of 9 other options. As it turns out, people reported being least likely to know Walters and most likely to know Rachels. In fact, according to the charts, 34% knew a Walter, only 34% knew a Walter, but 53% knew somebody named Rachel, and at least 10% knew at least 3 Rachels. I saw this chart and thought, I have to call Rachel. And Rachel. And Rachel. And here's the punchline. The poll, Bump wrote, also asked respondents to identify the weirdest name they could think of. The winner, by a wide margin, Keith. I have reached out to Ms. Edwards-Levy and Mr. Bump for more information on this. I'd have to say the first other human I knew named Keith was a couple of years behind me in grammar school. I was, 8. I had literally never met nor heard of another Keith. I thought I was the only one in the world, or at least there was a chance of it. The other Keith was best known around town for having run into the side of a slow-moving school bus. Now, anybody can run into a bus coming towards them or in front of a bus, but I was there, 1967, 1968, and this bus was already partially past other Keith, going fairly slowly, when he bolted out into the road and ran headfirst into the side of it. He bounced off in front of the back wheel and, as near as I know, did not suffer a scratch. Later, I found out about Rupert Murdoch and the fact that his real first name is Keith, and he prefers Rupert. I was going to go on about how I think the weirdest name you can think of is Keith and say the fact check was true when Mr. Bump blew the whole thing by getting back to me and telling me that this was, in fact, a joke that had blown up in his face. And I said, now, sir, you know how us Keiths I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Most of our countdown music was arranged, produced, and performed by Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, our musical directors of Countdown. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums, and Mr. Chanel handled the orchestration and the keyboards. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc., is the sports music. Some other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Tony Kornheiser. Everything else was, as ever, my fault. That's Countdown for today, day 135 of America Held Hostage. Just 1,328 days until the scheduled end of Trump's lame duck and lame-brained term, unless Putin removes him sooner, or the actuarial tables do, or Leonard Leo does, or we do. The next scheduled countdown is Thursday. Today's special episode was an experiment. We'll see if it's feasible long term. As always, bulletins as the news warrants. And remember, as always, Trump is laying the groundwork now to not leave office later, and thus he must be stopped. Till Thursday, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.